Hello, Earthers. This is Toys at Anymoon.com's review of Bandai's High Metal R VF-4 toys, now available in 2 flavors. In March 2019, Bandai debuted the mold with Hikaru's VF-4 as seen briefly in Flashback 2012. 11 months later, they dropped a non-canon Skull One homage scheme, this time labeled as a VF-4G. Both toys were regular releases that retailed for 12,000 yen. Due to those continuing licensing shenanigans, you'll need to hit up a specialty importer to get your hands on one. For everything else, including Votoms, Patlabor, Robotech, Transformers, and so much more, I go to Big Bad Toy Store. Show your support for this channel and find tons of great stuff by clicking the link in the comments below. Hikaru's toy comes in a box with lovely artwork by Tenjin. He did not return for the box of the Skull One scheme, but that art looks good too and is credited Yoshihiro Shibata, and I apologize if I mangled that. The box is efficiently sized and houses a plastic clamshell that contains a pilot figure, the same for either variant, and it seems reused from somewhere else as it has a hole in the butt that doesn't correspond to a peg on the seat. The canopy doesn't open, so you take it off, slide the pilot in, and replace it. 2 intake fan detail parts. To use these, you'll need to bring the leg down, swap out the factory installed closed intake shutters and store them, then reconnect the leg. There's a fin you can install by flipping the toy over, lining up the notches in the housing with the indents on the fin, and applying just a little pressure inward. There are 2 optional thigh covers for fighter mode. Put these on after the intake fan detail parts if you're going to use those. There are 3 landing gear. You'll need to swap off a cover and store that. These gear are painted plastic parts that plug in. Don't expect rubber tires or spinning wheels. There's a VF-1 style gun pod, a grip for that gun pod, and a fighter mode attachment part. To attach the gun to fighter mode, you're going to collapse the gun, slide the peg into the housing, then attach the housing to the belly of the craft. There are 3 pairs of fixed posed hands. These are ball joints that simply pop into place. You also get 2 display stand adapters, one for fighter and Gerwalk modes that can fit around the gun, and another for Battroid. The 4G also comes with a fin for the head. And taped to the back of the tray, you'll find a Tamashii Stage Act 5 clear display stand. And behind it all, you'll find those instructions, and you know you can get a full scan up on Anymoon, and do check out my separate transformation guide. Original Flashback 2012 paint scheme, and the homage Skull One paint scheme here. Paint scheme being a clear difference between these two, the head being the only other difference. Otherwise, these toys are exactly the same, and I want to say that straight up front in case you're debating getting one or the other. I like the head on the 4G. From the fin on top, the sensors on either side, the sensor in the forehead, the paint on the brow, the face, I think it's altogether a better head than we got on the original 4 toy. Now, the 4 toy, definitely the more iconic paint scheme. It's in the animation, so that's going to be a draw for a lot of folks. Whether or not you agree with the Skull One homage paint scheme is another thing altogether. That's pretty subjective. I do have the fixed posed optional hands on the 4G here and the integrated hands on my 4 on the side, and you can see what a big difference those fixed posed hands are, and big because their size is much more adequate than what we got on the integrated hands. Now here is a Skull One. And now Bandai wasn't trying to recreate the Skull One paint scheme on the 4G. It's an homage, but they've done things like put that black stripe along the legs. You don't get that on the Do You Remember Love version of the toy. You can see the difference in the scheme there. And you get some black, you got the Jolly Rogers on there. There's definitely different paint accents, but I altogether think they've missed the mark a little bit. They could have made this a much better paint scheme. I would have rather them ditch the bronze and go with dark gray throughout. I think that would have really helped. I think this part should be black or not painted. The lack of paint on that slot right in the middle is pretty off-putting. Now, the original Flashback, there is no paint in that area, so it doesn't stand out nearly as bad as it does on this toy. That's not uncommon to hear people say they really don't like this vehicle in Battroid mode. It makes sense, looks a little awkward, it's got a whole bunch of weight over the back, it doesn't look necessarily the most functional or dynamic, especially following up that VF-1 that everybody knows and loves. But you do get a lot of articulation, so you can try to derive the most possible pleasure from this mode. Starts with a ball-jointed head, so we can rock this head either way, twist it all around, look up, look down, and get some nice glaring at people poses. So that's all good. We have flaps on the shoulders here, and they come up and get out of the way to give you a little more access to that arm within, which is pivotal because that arm within is tucked very far in there. And this is one of the things that I would really like to see if anybody makes, or if Bandai makes a DX toy. This joint within would be great if they could make it slide towards the front of the housing. Right now it's a little far back there, so you're using up almost the entire length of the bicep just to get in front of this big housing, which really hinders your ability to use it. Now there is a little swinging joint within there that brings the arm down and gives you much more motion than you'd have if it was still up there pretty high. But if you couple that with a sliding forward, that would have really helped this toy out, or any VF-4 toy for that matter. Also, if this whole housing, if this part right here had a pivot point, so you could pivot that housing backward, that would also enable a lot more posing of the upper body and make this thing seem like a more functional Battroid. Now you do have a ball joint at the top of the shoulder that's giving you all of that motion, but you're running into the wing, you're running into the housing. Underneath you have a neat little elbow, lets you come up at least 90 degrees, and it also lets you come off to the side. So that's pretty cool too. So that's needed for transformation, but it's gonna let you get some pretty cool little poses, and the hands are on ball joints that you've already seen. Now moving down to the legs is where things get very interesting. This toy has amazing articulation at the hips. It starts with a back and forth swivel, and then there's a ball joint that you can see up at the top. Incredibly stiff, allows you to get very wide out and in, and twist out and twist in. So great articulation at the hips. Then you have the knee, which allows you to come way up, and we even have an extension to let you just get weird with it. You know, you can do anything you want with that knee. So that's great. And then we have an extension at the ankle so we can get our foot in, come out with it. So depending on what you're doing, you might want to have that extended all the way. And then you have the ability to pivot up or down. So you can angle that foot. There's a rotation point and the ability to bring the toe up or down like so. And then obviously the ability to close that as well. So amazing lower body articulation, but that upper body, those arms kind of getting in the way of the housings and vice versa, makes posing this toy a little bit funky. It's supposed to use these guns right here, pew, 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 pew. But we do get a gun pod with this toy, and that gun pod, I think, really saves the day, because when you use the gun pod, you can make this toy look pretty dynamic, even though those arms aren't really doing all that much. So huge props on the inclusion of the gun by Bandai. Now you've probably seen me knock some things around while I've been handling it and thought, okay, yeah, but is this thing fun to handle? And the answer to that is, by and large, yes. You do have these flaps, which you've seen I can knock around while I'm handling it. Spinning the toy around, you have these flaps here, which can get all jostled. The wings can get jostled. There are certainly things that can get jostled, but for the most part, this thing's rock solid. It's sticking together, no problem. I don't have anything popping out on me that shouldn't be while I handle it. So it is a fun experience. And if you throw the thing on the display stand that's included, your ability to pose this thing just goes through the roof. You can get it into some really cool looking poses, despite the fact that it's a little bit of an awkward Battroid mode. All right, let's continue on to Gerwalk. Easily my least favorite mode for the VF-4, not necessarily the high metal R, but just the VF-4 in general,
is Gerwalk mode, and a big part of that is the shortness of the arms in comparison to the rather large length of the legs and that front nose. Everything looks much less balanced than I'm used to seeing on other Kawamori designs, so that to me is a little bit of a bummer, although they do a pretty good job with what you have here. The toy holds together very well. The parts you're going to be needing to be cautious with are your canards. You're going to knock them, not going to knock them off or break them or anything, but you're going to knock them out of alignment. The nose, very easy to press down on that nose and get that out of alignment. And then these little pieces in the back, while you're handling it, you're going to squish them and have that not be in alignment. So very minor things, maybe your vertical stabilizers, but otherwise the toy handles the mode very, very well. It's very solid. The ankles on this toy, incredibly impressive with their back and forth and twisting, as I showed you in Battroid mode there. So it can handle a lot of poses. You're just going to be severely limited by those arms. Now, one cool feature of this toy, and you can enjoy it in any mode, are removable missiles. So we can pull these missiles off, and as you can see, very firm attachment, unlike what we got with Arcadia and Yamato. Nice fat pegs on there. They go into place and they stay where they're supposed to stay. The arms, we also have missiles up here that are removable as well. The only missiles that are not removable are these ones on the side of the neck of the craft. They have to move out of the way for transformation, so they just put them on a pivot to keep it more of a perfect transformation toy, and I'm okay with that. Honestly, I don't remove any of the missiles generally. So there you go. Pretty cool features, pretty cool handling of the toy. Just it's really a question for you if Gerwalk is your thing for the VF-4 design. I've got it holding both my guns at the same time. One is on the under mount, the other is in the hand. You can see the undermount in Gerwalk looks a little bit inappropriate, but otherwise you're getting a little bit more mileage again with the display stand, so that's pretty cool. You can do your falling backwards and shooting poses, and everything holds on nice and tight. For those of you unfamiliar with the Tamashii Stage Act display stand, you do have the pivot at the base. This is a ratcheting joint, and you have a just tension swivel up at the top. It's enough to secure the toy perfectly well, and it allows you to do some banking on either direction. Now, I do have the intake covers removed right now, as well as those covers for the thighs underneath. I wanted to show you what a perfect transformation version of this toy would look like. You can see in fighter mode, it still looks really, really nice, even without those optional accessory parts. So if you are a perfect transformation stickler, this toy will work out pretty well for you. Another cool little thing that we can see in fighter mode, these boosters here are ball joints, so you can move them around, but there's no other boosters here that really can pivot at all. You can play with the feet a little bit, but really it's just isolated to these boosters here. And other than the missiles, that's all you're really getting out of the fun factor in fighter mode. Here's another quick comparison of the VF-1 and the homage paint scheme. You can see they aren't trying to recreate it perfectly, just inspired by, and I think it looks pretty decent. With this toy now has the landing gear installed and the intake fan detail parts installed, and I just want to show you, it still handles very solid, decent amount of heft, everything holding together very well. You are going to bump canards, you are going to bump tail fins. These little flaps in the back are probably the worst offenders. You're going to bump them and get them askew. But otherwise, everything holding together well, and it deserves high points for that, and especially the not having the landing gear fall off on you. The landing gear do introduce one issue though, and that is if you have these fins up to create ground clearance, the toy will want to do a wheelie because all of that weight is in the back there. So you can solve that by just bringing these fins down in the back. Oops, grabbed a wing. Now, that does bring up another point. There are a lot of people that kind of like an angled down look to the wings of a VF-4, and you can kind of cheat and pull it off by pulling them out. It makes the hinges a little more obvious, so I know some people have said that they wish there was just a little natural camber downwards towards those wings. Now, there's the intake fan detail. Here is the closed detail that you would have for like space flight there. So you can see both of your options. Again, fighter mode, by far my favorite mode for this toy. I think it looks great and handles very well.
From a line art perspective, this toy is hard to fault. Here you can see how it stacks up to the larger Yamato or Arcadia versions of the toy. No toy is going to match the chunkiness of the hand-drawn VF Battroid, but it does pretty well. In many ways, this toy feels like a shrunken Yamato toy. It stands 17 centimeters tall in Battroid compared to Yamato's 24.5. At 19.3 centimeters long in fighter mode, it's almost 10 centimeters shorter. The High Metal R line plays it loose with scale, with most toys varying from 180 to 1/100, and in that respect, this toy will fit right in. Don't be fooled by the High Metal name. Metal content on this toy is very sparse, primarily limited to the joints, and the 110 grand heft is proportionally much less than the Yamato toy, which tipped the scales just past 380 grams. If you're looking for only the best VF-4 toy, Arcadia has teased a Flashback 2012 repaint of their toy, which features integrated landing gear, integrated thigh covers, integrated intake fans, and an opening canopy on top of all the nice elements in this toy. So if you're looking for the most fun VF-4, it doesn't bust your wallet, the High Metal R gives you the display stand, a gun pod, fixed posed hands, and has missiles that attach much more securely, making handling the toy a more pleasant experience. Check out my full review on anymoon.com, subscribe, and thanks for watching.